sparkling day. Welcome to hang on, where are we up to? Porchlight's letter. Yeah, hang on. Welcome to Porchlight Letters podcast number 2367. Can every details really matter in family history? Oh, yes, details do matter because that's where the real story lives. So when you're looking for stories, you want to look for addresses of places that your ancestors have lived, because this will reveal either stability or hardship. Were they in the upper class? Were they in the lower class? Were they in the middle class? Whereabouts did they live? And what do those addresses reveal? What was I looking for? So clients one I was looking for one time, and we discovered that they had a transportation business, and they actually lived on site of the transportation business. So that showed that they lived and worked in the same place. And it was in several directories. We're looking in directories over the years, and they were there in every single directory from the time, the husband was there from before he got married, when he got married, and all through the rest of his life. And then his sons took over the business because they were living there as well. So it became sort of like a family compound in a way, but that's where the family lived, was in the transportation business. So yes, you can find that. And you can also find occupations which show opportunity or limitations. Where did they work? What was their occupation? Were they a miner? Were they a jeweler? Were they a bookbinder? Were they a farmer? You can find out that, if they were on a farm, how many acres did they have? How many people did they employ? Some of these questions can be very easily answered on census reports. But then you also have, in the directories, it would have listed there on the directories and electoral rolls would have listed what their address was and also what their status was, what sort of type of work that they did. And when it came to the women, they would be listed there under their husband's name. So on one of them, I found the wife's name. So I can't remember the name I was looking for at this time, but it could have been like Joan Smith. But then in parentheses after it, it had widow of and the husband's name. And then it had her address. And then it had that she was a homemaker. And that was in the directory in the days when everything was listed under the male's name with the woman's name in parentheses. But this one had the husband's name there because he was deceased. So you can find out things like, and it shows that she is the widow of, and it shows the husband's name. Now you have another record that you can go and do deeper research, because now you've got another hint, another clue. Excuse me. When did her husband pass away? The directory won't tell you, but you can go now looking for his death certificate to see if you can find his death record, to see if you can find that. Household changes signaled loss or growth. When the household moved or changed, they'd either lost somebody out of the household or they had grown and expanded. Most people, once they were in an address, they stayed there for a long time. There was in some areas that they didn't move at all, but if they did move, it meant that somebody had passed away, so they had to maybe reduce the type of place that they lived in, or they had outgrown the house that they lived in. Patterns speak louder than events. Absolutely. Look for the patterns in the family. I had a lot of family a lot of ancestors that come from Cornwall in England. And there's a lot of county changes and everything else. So look for those too, because sometimes the counties will change depending on sometimes it was political, sometimes it was, I don't know, something else. But look for county changes and things like that. Everybody was listed in this church. Now they're listed in this church. Why? Hang on. Everybody's records were over in this church over here. Now all of a sudden they're appearing in this church over here. What happened? Did somebody die? Did they have to move to a new area for some reason? So look for different patterns and things within the family and stuff. Did people stay within a group area and that's where the family lived, or were they constantly moving? They could have been constantly moving because maybe they had debtors that were chasing them, and so they were trying to escape the debtors, or maybe they thought that their fortunes could be found in a different place. The grass is always greener type of situation. But small details humanize your ancestors. when you can find places that they've lived. And I will tell you this, I am one that here in New Zealand, I have not done this in England yet because I haven't been to England yet. But here in New Zealand, I've been around New Zealand a lot when I was growing up. And our parents would take us past places that our ancestors used to live. Like when we were down in Dunedin, we went down this little side street, and Mum says, "Oh, that house there is where Papa grew up," and Papa's my mum's dad. That's the house that Papa grew up in. And I was like, cool. And you suddenly had this like connection to it because that's where he grew up when he was a little boy. And it's like, this is so cool. Well, where's the school that he went to? Well, that's down the hill, and you had to go up this big hill to get there. Not Baldwin Street, which is the steepest street in the world, but residential street in the world. But it was along that area in town where Baldwin Street in Dunedin. And so they then drove us down the hill to go and see where Papa went to school. But you kind of had it because I'd only known Papa as this older man in my life, this white-haired man who was my grandfather. And I didn't know him as a boy, but this helped me understand his upbringing a little bit, where he was born, and well, actually not where he was born because I wasn't shown that, but where he lived and grew and went to school. It gave me a connection, and now I could start picturing my grandfather as a boy because I have seen photos of him as a boy. At the time, I'd seen photos of him as a boy, so I was able to make that connection with him. There's another place that is here in Wellington where we didn't go to the house, but we were across the valley from the house, and we could look over there. Mum will go, "See that green house over there?" I go, "Yeah." She says, "That's where Nana grew up, and Nana's her mother." And she said that's also the place where my second great grandmother passed away. And that's the house where they took the door off the pantry and laid it on the table so they could lay her body there and prepare her body for burial, because the table wasn't long enough. So they took the pantry door off, laid it across the table so they could put my second great grandmother's body on the table to the pantry door to prepare her for burial. And so now I had an image of where my grandmother grew up, and my grandmother was, oh, hang on, did she? I'm trying to remember this. I think her mother passed away when she was a girl. Jeepers, it's been a while since I looked at the tree. But I got a sense of this is where she lived. Oh, okay, that's where she lived. Excellent. So I like finding these little pieces of the puzzle, putting them together of places that they grew up in, places that they've lived, grew up in, went to school if they went to school. And I've got another side of the family, and my grandmother who's on my dad's mum, her twin sister lived in the area where my grandmother was born. And so whenever we went there, we were told different stories about the places and things like that. But the family is still on the farm, and her twin sister was married and lived on a farm. And so, of course, all of Dad's cousins were born in this area and on this farm and everything else. And Dad used to tell us stories of when he used to go and work for Pop, who was my great-grandfather, and things like that. So it brings alive the story for you when you can make those connections to places and times and things like that. And these details of where they were living, occupations, the household changes, any patterns that were in there, small details about them, transform names into lives. They're not just names on a piece of paper anymore. They are now become live people who lived there. And sometimes when you're walking down the street, on a street that they used to live in, you think, oh, this is pretty cool. You know, my grandmother walked along the street when she was a girl, or my grandfather walked on the street, my papa walked on the street. You know, you're walking in their footsteps and things like that. And so your practical takeaway for today is track small changes over time. Use census reports, electoral roll. Now in New Zealand, we don't have census reports, but we have the electoral rolls. So have a look on those, because it will list those that were eligible to vote. And if you look you won't find any women on there until 1893. 1893 is when the women started appearing on the electoral rolls, because that is the year that New Zealand allowed women the right to vote. And so you can go back and look at these electoral rolls, and it will show you the names, and it's all alphabetical by last name, then it's alphabetical by first name. So, but you can have a look at the addresses and find the addresses that are the same. Did they all live in the same house? they had to be a certain age in order to appear on the electoral rolls as well. So in New Zealand, look at electoral rolls. In England, you can look at in England and Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall. You can look at the census reports that were done. They were done in the years ending in 1. In the US, you had the federal census that were done on the years ending in 0. But you also had some states that would do a census report on the year ending in 5. So you can find those, and that gives you a tighter window in which to look. Because there was one situation where I was looking up for a client, and her great-grandparents or second great-grandparents were married and divorced in a 10-year time span. But they lived in New York that had that did the census on the 5s. So on the federal census, we saw them as single. We found them as single people on, I think it was like the 1870 report. And by 1880, they were divorced. And so we found them again as single people then, but we found their marriage certificate. But then we had to be very careful because this particular one had, in the same county, there was 2 boys that were born with the exact same first name and middle name and last name. This is a cool one. These 2 boys were born in the same county with the same first name, last name, and middle name. Their mothers had the same first name, different maiden names, and their fathers had the same last name. So we're still trying to figure out if they were cousins or something like that, if the husbands were siblings or something like that, but their mothers both had the same first name but different maiden names. So we had to be very careful when looking for records for the second great grandfather to make sure that he was the right second great grandfather and not the other one. So yeah, that made it a little tricky, but it was very interesting to research that one. It did make it a little tricky, but the year ending in 5, we were able to find the New York census report that had the second great grandmother, the second great grandfather, and by that stage they'd also had a son, and this was the son that we were looking for. So we were able to find him as well, but we couldn't find them on the federal census because they were on the years ending in 0. And it was like the 1870 census that they weren't on. But because they got married in 1871, he was born in 1872. They were on the 1875 census, but they were divorced by the 1880 census. But because we had that 5-year one, we were able to capture them in between. So also look at directories, phone directories. You'll find information in there. Check too for newspapers, because newspapers are great at showing different things in there. Like if an employee is celebrating a particular anniversary, like had been there for 25 years or 30 years, was now retiring, you would find that information. You would find a local article in there about that person. That person could be, one of your ancestors that's been addressed to that, and you find out because they then give you the work history of that person. So then you've got more information that way as well. So your practical takeaway is track small changes over time. If you want help analysing everyday records, please send us a private message and we're more than happy to assist. And in closing, details turn facts into people. Think about that. Details turn facts into people. And it's really cool when your ancestors suddenly become alive to you, especially if they've, and this is just in the small details, the little details. This isn't in anything that happened, like, what was it like for them in the Spanish flu, if there was a coronation that they went through, wars that they fought in. This is just their everyday lives that you can find them in. And sometimes you may even find them in a census report as a servant or a housemaid or a cook in somebody else's house. So remember to don't turn away anything. Look at it, note it on your form, on your spreadsheet. Note the information on there, because you might be coming back to that information to see if that was the right person that fits in your tree. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll be back tomorrow evening. I'm actually going to change Sunday's time to 6:30 Pacific, because at 5 p.m. Pacific, we have the Zanakin Studios podcast on, and that tends to go for an hour, and then I've got to scramble to get onto this one. So I'm going to change it a little bit on Sundays to come in at 6:30. So tomorrow night we will see you here at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you want to see us for Zanakin, we will be broadcasting directly into Zanakin's studio YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to catch us over there. But go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll be back tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Hei konera.